Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Jared. Today we're going to be working on my Civic. Going to be changing the intake manifold to a Skunk 2 Pro Racing manifold. I've also got a 70mm Skunk throttle body to throw on there as well. This is the new Skunk intake manifold I got. This one is real. Didn't buy China one this time, nothing China. And also the Skunk throttle body as well. This one's 70mm, just like I mentioned. This is the manifold that's come off the car. I'm just filming this ahead just to show you. But this is the original B16A2 intake manifold, which the Skunk one is designed off of. So I think just looking at it, the runners, the length and the size look pretty similar, but the plenum is actually larger in volume on the Skunk. So this throttle body I think was actually changed that the previous owner told me. So this one's a 66mm throttle body compared to 70mm on the Skunk. So also notice that the Skunk doesn't have the provision for this hose. I'm not sure what it actually is, but the guy before me had just blocked it off. So why would you want to change to the Skunk intake manifold? I think the main reason is with the larger plenum and also the larger machined opening that can accept a 70mm throttle body. You can make more power with this. Probably if your engine is stock, it's not going to make much of a difference. You're probably better off going with just the standard manifold. The standard throttle body, like 66mm, is probably more than enough. In my case, my engine, again, if you haven't seen before, it's got high compression pistons and I got big cams, valve springs, retainers. So this thing can easily rev to 9,000 and it's got the high compression and the flow. On the dyno graph that the guy gave me, it sort of tapered off in the last 1500 RPM. So I think the new manifold with the throttle body is gonna be able to let this engine make more power up to 9,000 RPM, which the limit is set on at the moment. And also being pretty much a stock design, everything goes straight on. There's not much modification at all that's required. I am going to simplify a few things, so I want to get rid of this hose on with the PCV valve here, just because it looks pretty ugly. And obviously this one's already deleted. The coolant lines that run to the idle air control valve also going to delete. All this does is heat up the idle air control valve and in turn heat the air going through it for cold starts. That then flows out into the throttle body, which then comes out the other side and back into the coolant neck here. That's the same thing, it's just heating up the air that goes into the throttle body. If you're in a hot climate like Australia, maybe California, South America, something like that, even Asia where it doesn't snow or never gets cold, you don't need these coolant lines. They're just to help on cold start. So it's actually going to rob you of some power running your hot coolant through the throttle body and the idle air control valve, heating all that air going into your manifold. And it also simplifies everything a lot up and prevents potentially any coolant leaks from occurring. And these hoses are quite hard to get to at the back as well. So you want to start by removing the strut bar if you have one. Then I'm removing the brake booster hose and then the fuel return and the fuel in, then removing the bolts holding down the fuel rail and the vacuum line for the regulator, then lift that out. Then you can take your injectors off. Then remove the throttle cable and the water lines on the back of the idle air control valve. and also the ones on the manifold near the coolant neck. Then you can work on loosening the nuts holding down the manifold flange. And the manifold should be able to lift out. Next, just remove the old gasket. And in this case, I'm going to change my heater hoses, so I'm just removing it off the firewall and also changing this hose. So what I've done is the coolant line just coming out of the water neck here, or the water pipe. I've just got the hose already on here. That's just going to loop up and go into the fitting on the intake manifold. So it's just going to loop that coolant line. Also, this hose is coming from the breather box here at the moment, and I've just put it on to teed it into my breather line that the hose, this one here, goes to up here. So I'm just going to have the two inlets going into the catch can, and then the other one going back to the intake pipe here. My plan is later to buy the fittings and do the proper catch can breather install where you remove that box, but for now, while I'm NA, I think that's going to be enough. If you're boosted, you definitely want to go in that route. So now I'm just working on moving all the sensors over to the new intake manifold, starting with this temperature sensor. Now I'm just removing the shims I had to hold the fuel rail up, and I'm just double nutting the studs because you need to remove them to transfer onto the new manifold. Next, just switch over your throttle cable bracket. And then I'm switching over the seals for the injectors now. I have these special adapters for the Bosch injectors I'm running. Then work on removing the idle air control valve. Now's a good time to think about changing that gasket if it's worn. Next, you can install the new throttle body gasket, and the Skunk throttle body in this case has new Allen head bolts to install rather than the two studs and nuts on the original one. Then you want to remove the coolant lines off the old throttle body because we'll need to get the sensors off of that. Unfortunately, whoever installed the throttle body before, the heads for the Phillips here have rounded and they're stripped out. So I'm going to have to cut the screw and be able to turn it out with a Phillips. And then for the throttle position sensor as well, if you're going to reuse this one, we're going to have to do the same thing. Just cut a slit through the head of the rivet here, so then we can put a Phillips screwdriver in it and remove the bolt. Skunk do include these two bolts, I think, or I assume are going to be for the throttle position sensor. When cutting the heads of the rivets, make sure you don't go too deep and damage the sensor itself. So with the throttle position sensor, you can see there's a little tang here to align in this section here. So you just need to line it up the correct way. If you have it 180 degrees out, it's not going to work. So what happens is when the throttle moves, that position sensor moves inside that provision here. So with these holes you can see it's slotted, and this is actually spring loaded, so as you turn it, its adjustment will change. So that's at 0 at the moment, and then you can actually turn it more in that direction. Didn't do it too tight because we're going to have to calibrate this later. Don't forget to transfer over this O-ring, otherwise it's going to leak pressure for the map sensor. Just going to reuse these screws for now just because I don't have any 4mm bolts, but I want to go replace these definitely because they look a bit scrappy now that they've got the cut in the head. So I want to sort of tuck the brake booster hose because at the moment it just comes straight out the top and it looks a bit ugly. So I want to rotate this fitting towards the bottom. So I've just got this really big, it almost matches the size of the hole perfectly, just sliding it inside. And then you can just rotate that down. Just rotate that down into the position you want. One thing you're also going to need is a small cap for this vacuum line here if you're not using it. If you're boosted, you could use this for your wastegate actuator or even a boost gauge, or if you've got an aftermarket ECU and you've got onboard map reference, you could also use the vacuum line for that. Since I'm no longer using the PCV valve here, I've just got myself a rubber cap to go over there. Fortunately, I don't have a rubber cap for this, so I'm gonna have to go to the shops and buy one. Okay, in terms of installing everything I need on the intake manifold, I'm done. Just besides that one little nipple there that I mentioned, I decided to change the hardware on this as well, just because I had some 5mm bolts and it looks a lot better with the new hardware. You won't be able to use this bracket on your intake manifold if you are still using that. Also, if you want to retain the PCV valve, you'll also need to just switch over these hoses on yours as well. I just done a test fit of the intake manifold on here, and it was just hitting the alternator bracket here because it sits a little bit proud close to that stud. I did see online before where other people had to trim a little bit just off the bottom of the bracket here. I'm a bit surprised with how many years Skunk's been making this manifold that they still haven't fixed this issue. But I'm just going to take about 2 to 3mm off the bottom here, just a straight cut, that should be enough. Never always trust these gaskets, so I like just to put a little bit of sealant just around where the water is going to flow. So all of those manifold bolts, nuts are now done up, and I decided to go with the new hardware for all of them. I used a combination of the ratcheting combination spanner, a extension to go underneath, mostly on the bottom of the manifold, and then also this offset ring spanner to get all of those nuts done up. Remember, when you're tightening this up, you got to start from the middle and work your way out. Now I just got to put the throttle cable on and plug the sensors back in and put the fuel rail back on as well. And not to forget the brake booster lines and the idle air control valve. Now you just want to work on the opposite of the uninstallation we did. So just putting those new coolant hoses on. Reinstalling the injectors. And then make sure you're plugging the right one into each cylinder. I previously labeled them. Then you can throw the rail back on. Don't forget the vacuum line. Then you can put the fuel feed and return back on. And the PCV hose. So one thing I've noticed is that with the new intake manifold and throttle body, the actual throttle cable needs to sit closer to the throttle body, so that I can't use my bracket that I've got at the moment. So I'm going to have to make a new bracket that's longer in this section for it to bolt up to. So I'm just gonna have to go to Bunnings to get a piece of metal to bend up that bracket. Also, with the bigger throttle body opening now, my silicon coupler for the throttle body also doesn't fit on. I'm probably gonna need a 3-inch coupler to go on there. So I just went out and got a new 3-inch coupler to go on here. Fits fine. And I was just about to throw this on, and then I saw the opening, and it's not even quite 70 mil in diameter, and also some of the edges are pushed down. So I think I'm just going to cut a little bit off the back here just to make it a slightly larger, so we're not bottlenecking the throttle body. So I just trimmed this 5 mil off the end of the coupler. Now you can see the opening 70 mil. And I can still fit the 3-inch coupler on the outside. And I just tidied up all of the plastic around the edges. You don't want to let any of that plastic get into your engine. Also got a packet of 4 mil vacuum caps, and that was the perfect size for the one on the back here. So I just made this bracket out of some aluminium plate. I just bought this from Bunnings. It's a 20 by 3 mil piece, and this one was 1 meter long, $7.80 from memory. And I've just copied the design of the old one and gave it a bit of polish. So I'll just install that. So there you go, the new bracket, new hardware. And just when you're adjusting the throttle cable, make sure that the throttle is actually closing and the cable is not holding the throttle open slightly like that. Since we lost coolant when we took the intake manifold off and changed all those hoses, just going to need to top up the radiator and the overflow bottle. Just while that's bleeding now, just going to go onto the Hondata and check the actual throttle position on there, and then using that information I'll be able to adjust the throttle position sensor before we start the car. So to adjust the TPS, just undo those 2 bolts and you can rotate this left and right. So it will rotate like this, and you want to try and adjust it as close to 0% throttle as possible and then lock it up. So you want to try to adjust the TPS on those 2 bolts and adjust it as close to 0 as possible. So 3% was the lowest I could go. I couldn't actually even get into the negatives or hit 0 when it was all the way adjusted. So then next we're going to go to parameters and then TPS, and then we're going to do the calibration from scaling. So with no foot on the accelerator, we're going to go read. So you can see the values just updated. And then with your foot all the way on the accelerator, we're going to do the maximum reading, which is still the same. And then you want to go to update. And then we go back to sensors, should be reading 0, and then fully depressed 100%. So 100%, 0, 0, press down 100, and 100. Alright guys, so that wraps up another video. It was an interesting one today. I had to go learn some stuff about the TPS and calibrating that. Really happy with how things turned out in the engine bay. It looks so much better. Really looking forward to see how much performance gain we get from it. Quality from the Skunk products is really good. I highly recommend them. If you have any questions or need any help, put them down below. If not, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you for the next video.